Hey guys, Arlisha here and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be making some paint. It's been a little while since we've done this. I haven't really been feeling super inspired to make paint lately, but I did want to get back to that at least for today, share a new color with you that I have made before, and also just give you a little update on the paint making as a whole, what I've made so far, and my plans on what I'm gonna do with all of the stuff that I have. I will leave a link to the paint making playlist in the card as well as down in the description if you'd like to see the videos I've made so far. Lots of questions answered there about ratios and the materials I use and how to make your binder, all of that stuff. Today we are going to be making Ultramarine Rose, which is PR 259. It's this pinky purple sort of color that granulates. It's very, very pretty. It has a relatively low tinting strength, at least the version I'm making here does, which could have to do with the nature of the pigment or just the one that I purchased. This one is from Earth Pigments, and you guys have heard me mention before that a few of the pigments I got from them were relatively lower in tinting strength, and some of them I was actually a bit disappointed in and had replaced them with pigments from Kramer. This is a color that kind of falls a little bit in between. It's definitely not a super strong color, so I've thought about replacing it. But there's something in the softness of it that I really like that's kind of stopped me from wanting to buy more pigment, and I just kind of want to use this one up. As soon as the pigment is mixed with the binder, the color of the paint itself gets much darker. You'll see that this isn't necessarily true to the shade of watercolor when we swatch that a little bit later, but I find it really interesting the different phases that this particular color goes through in the paint making process and even as it dries in pans. As a little bit of a side note, I am still technically using the same batch of binder that I used previously that I made back in March. And you may remember at that time that I had told you that the shelf life of binder, when kept even in the refrigerator, is 6 months. And this binder is now closer to 8 months old. I did do a quick check on it. I didn't see any signs of mold or any separation of the ingredients inside of the binder. And to be honest, because at this point I'm not necessarily needing to sell my paints, I wanted this to be an experiment. So I wanted to see what would happen if I used quote-unquote old binder to make my paint. Someone had also recently asked if the age of the binder affects the age of the paints as far as that shelf life goes, and it doesn't mean that your paints will only last 6 months because the binder should only be kept in a liquid form for up to that long, which is just something I have read and haven't actually tested for myself. Maybe this will be the beginning of that test. But when it comes to that 6-month shelf life, that's actually in reference to the amount of time that the binder should stay in liquid form before it may start to mold. And with watercolors, mold is always a little bit of an issue, and moisture is really the danger in kickstarting mold. So as long as your paints stay dry, they should last, forever, dry or airtight. Hopefully that helps with that question. So the only reason that the binder itself is at risk of going bad or molding is because there's so much moisture, because it's a liquid in this form and it hasn't cured, that water hasn't evaporated. So anyway, that's the danger of mold and that 6-month time period. This paint is actually a really easy one to make, and I don't necessarily want to say I forgot about it, but it definitely wasn't top on my list of colors to make for videos. I think because it's not in my main palette. It used to be, but I found that I wasn't using it very often, so I ended up replacing it with something I originally thought I would like better, but then I ended up feeling like I had too many similar colors in my palette of handmade watercolors. I don't have every color that I've made in my palette just because the palette I have doesn't have enough room for all of them. It's just an 18 well palette. But with the removal of this one, I think I put in like a quinacridone pink as well. But I also had quinacridone red and my warmer red, so I just ended up with too many pinkish reddy colors, and I'm kind of missing this one now, and it does fall into a unique place of being a little bit more purple, and of course that granulation quality is very unique. I'm always a little bit torn when editing paint making videos like this one because part of me wants to speed things up and make certain parts of the video go a little bit faster because I worry that they won't be interesting or they'll be boring, but at the same time a paint making video just is different from a time-lapse video where you're watching a painting come together. It's kind of more about those little real-time patient moments, you know? That's kind of the point of making content like this. And I'm really glad that you guys enjoy it. It's actually been a few months since we've had a paint making video. I can't necessarily confirm that they will become more regular after this, but here's one for now, and hopefully I'll be able to keep answering questions in the future. Coming back to this first swatch that we did, after the swatch was completely dry, I tested it. I have a tissue here, but you could also use a clean paper towel or a clean dry cloth. And I was just testing to see if any of that color rubbed off. If it had rubbed off when I did that first test, that would be a sign to me that there was too much pigment and not enough binder. Either that or the pigment had not been completely dispersed within the binder, and I may either need to add more binder or continue to mold the paint for longer. But at this point, there was no rub off, and the swatch itself wasn't shiny, which was telling me that there wasn't necessarily too much binder. Here's a look at a dried pan of this color that I've actually been using recently, which is why you're seeing some lightness around some of those edges. The color does dry a bit matte, but there's kind of this weird combination of matte and shiny to the texture of the paint that was a little bit deterring, and I didn't really like the look of it at first. And when it re-wets, you can see that lighter color again. And it does take a little bit of work to get a considerable amount of color from the re-wet paint. So I'll swatch that over on the side here so you can kind of see them side by side. Again, super light tinting strength on this color. This is a kind of shameful look at all of the paints I have made so far. Some of these half pans are full, some of them are not. All of these are dry, but they're in different stages, and there's some colors that I need to make a lot more of. It's kind of a mess, which we'll talk about in a second. Here are more dry half pans of this color. I made these a few months ago, and I figured since I have a new fresh batch here, I would top them off. You can see here what I was saying about that texture with paints that haven't been reactivated recently. It's kind of matte around the outside and shiny towards the center. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but that's what this color does, as well as the ultramarine blue that I have from Earth Pigments. It kind of dries in the same way, which makes me think it has something to do with the way these pigments are processed by the company as opposed to something to do with this particular color. But again, I'm not an expert, so I'm not exactly sure. I topped off these pans here with some fresh paint, and it was kind of important for me to try to get that as close to the edges as possible, knowing that some messes would happen, but it will kind of dry in the shape that you leave it. So I didn't want to just cover a little bit of that. I wanted to have like a nice layer across the entire top of the pan for the most part. Once those pans that I had already started before were topped off, I put the rest into a plastic jar. If when those other pans were dry, they needed more paint, I could top them off again, or this paint will simply go into fresh half pans and I will have more of this color. And I think as we move from this final part of paint making into actually painting with the paints that I've made, it's probably a good point to talk about what I'm planning to do with all these paints. I had mentioned previously that I wanted to sell them, and then said I wasn't sure if I wanted to sell them, and all of that's kind of still true at this point. I obviously have way more handmade paints than one person needs. It's kind of a crazy amount just because when you make paints, it's kind of difficult to make super tiny batches. I guess I shouldn't say that it's super difficult. I just don't do it very often. I usually end up making larger batches. And part of me would like to sell them someday, but what I'm really, really not interested in is going through the process of packaging all of these, so wrapping them in some sort of foil and then creating paper labels for them and then packing them up in some sort of shipping container, figuring out how best to ship them, and then actually hoping that they ship safely. I kind of went through all of the anxiety and stress of that already in making my online shop ready for prints and originals, which has been a long and arduous process of its own. And I'm not necessarily too keen on the idea of restarting all of that stress and learning for selling my handmade paints. I know that it could be financially beneficial to do so, to sell my paints and to get those out there to you guys. And of course, I want to share them with you. But at this point, I'm just not really prepared, and I don't really have the time to do that. So I don't know. I don't know at this point. That's kind of another part of why I haven't been making a ton of paints recently, because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them all. I kept making paints and I kept having more paint and using some of it, but not really. But I don't know. It almost seems sometimes like the easiest thing to do would just be to, give them away every once in a while or sell them in small batches and, sell tiny little limited palette sets where I wouldn't be trying to sell all of the paints I have at once. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't decided. Ultimately, I feel like if I could just hire an assistant who would come to my house and package all of the stuff and do all of that work for me, that would be really easy. But I'm not able to do that right now at this time. So I don't know. So they sit and we keep painting and we keep making paint making videos, and that's kind of just how it's going for now. I know this answer may not be largely satisfactory to everyone, as I'm sure you would like to give these paints a try yourself, but really the point of this paint making series isn't to show you guys something that you can purchase. It's more to inspire you for something that you can do, because I didn't know anything about paint making, obviously, before I decided to look into it and to learn about it as a hobby and a skill and a practice. And I have learned a lot along the way and done my best to share a bunch of that with you guys. And that's really what I want to do more than anything, is document my process of learning about paint making. So maybe someday I'll have some way of selling the paints that I have. I have given away some paints to some close friends and artists. So there are a couple other people who have tried my paints, but if I inspire you to do anything at all, I don't want it to just be to spend money on things. It would be to try it yourself. I'd like to do a video, I don't want to say soon, but I would like to do a video in this series where I just talk about the things I would recommend to get started. So if you had a limited budget and you wanted to get started with paint making, the supplies and specific pigments I would recommend to get started with. I think that would be really useful and really helpful to those who are looking to try out paint making. They're not sure if they will like it, but they want to try and they don't know what colors they should start with, which colors are easier to make, which ones should you avoid if you're a beginner, that sort of thing. Now that is something that I feel a little bit more competent in answering at this point, so I definitely want to make a video like that soon, and I hope that that would be something that you guys would enjoy. I kind of haven't been talking about what I've actually been doing for a little while, and we've moved into the actual painting portion. I was originally thinking of splitting these into 2 separate videos, as I could have almost split it right down the middle and had 2 12-minute videos, maybe even been able to save myself some work time in not having to make a video for next week because it would have been done already. But I really wanted these 2 to go together, so hopefully you guys will enjoy this extra long video for this week. as I am painting with my handmade watercolors, and I did use the ultramarine rose in this piece, mostly for the background, but also to mix some of the skin tones. As you may have seen when I was mixing colors on the actual slab before I put all of that stuff away, when this color, because it's a bit purplish, when it's mixed with some yellows, you get these really nice, creamy, milky sort of browns that again are very, very soft. And because this color, as well as my nickel titanium yellow, are a bit creamier, a bit milkier, they tend to be a little bit more opaque, which is generally true of most handmade watercolors. Because we don't have large industrial machines to really, really push the pigment and binder together and to make sure that that pigment is as fine as possible, things tend to be a bit more opaque when you're making watercolors by hand. For some people that may sound like a downside or a bad thing, and depending on how you like to work, it could be. But I have actually come to really love the bold opacity of working with handmade watercolors like these. It kind of feels like a little bit of a mix between working with watercolors and working with gouache. Not completely, of course, because you're not going to be able to really layer light colors on top of dark colors, but I am able to get really bold, strong, solid color when working with paints like these, which is fantastic, and I really, really love that. It brought me a lot of joy to work on this piece and to paint something with my handmade watercolors. It's been a while since I've gotten even just this palette out of my own paints, and I'm really looking forward to using them again. I kind of needed this piece as a sort of a breath of fresh air, which, you know, everything kind of goes in cycles. So I've been in this place before where, like I mentioned recently, I was feeling stuck with art and kind of feeling like I didn't know even how to make anything, which I know is silly because I've been doing this for a while. But I just felt like my brain was sort of starting to see the mistakes in my art better, and I didn't know how to improve and how to make art that would satisfy my increased observational skills, which is kind of just how art works. It's a fluctuation of being better at observing and then being better at actually applying that observation to painting. So it's a constant cycle, a constant process. And this piece was kind of a reminder to me that the growth will keep happening. So I felt like I was able to apply some of the ways I've been able to observe better. It's hard to even say what that means, but I've been able to see the mistakes I've made and learn from them, basically. And this piece feels like a step forward, which I really needed, because I feel like I've been taking a lot of steps to the side, maybe even a few steps backward when it comes to actually making art. I was reminded of the kind of art that I actually want to make and the kind of things that I like to create in watercolor pieces like this. I really like to include sort of abstract and surreal elements to my art, and getting back to that in this way was just, it was exactly what I needed. And I'm super, super happy that this piece came together the way it did. And as I'm sitting here and realizing that I have actually sold at least one piece that I've made with my handmade watercolors before, I'm gonna go ahead and list this piece for sale on my shop as well. So the original will be for sale on my shop, and there's a link in the description if you'd like to check that out. And I'm probably going to be scanning this one in to make prints as well. It's been a while since I've done that, since I've painted something for a video and then actually had some sort of product or merchandise to show for it, which I guess is just kind of reflective of how I haven't been feeling great about my art lately and haven't really felt like the studies and things that I've been doing have been worth selling or appropriate to sell for whatever reason. But yeah, lots of ways that the things that have happened in this video have felt like achievements for me. Getting back into paint making and kind of remembering why I want to make paint not necessarily to sell the watercolors, but just to document the process with you guys and maybe inspire you to try a new skill or a new craft or a new hobby. And of course, it was really, really helpful and inspiring for me to make a piece of art that I really, really like and was very excited to put together. I like the structure of the face very much. When I took a picture of the piece as I was working on it and shifted that into grayscale, I liked how it looked, which is always a good sign. As I've said many, many, many times before, when your values are strong, you can just kind of play around and do crazy things with the actual colors you're using when the structure, that underlying value structure is solid. And I really did towards the end embrace some of the natural opacity of the handmade watercolors and really did try to utilize that in layering things like the strands of hair. And I like it. It feels bold. It feels good. I like some of the looseness in the stylizing of this. I think one of the things that really helps with keeping this piece stylized in a way that I like is I wasn't working from one primary reference. I had one reference for the pose and another different reference for some lighting and shadow type things that I liked and wanted to implement here, but I wasn't specifically trying to capture a particular angle from one reference photograph or anything like that. So there were a lot of things that I had to kind of interpret on my own and come up with on my own. And in the end, that was really for the best. I was able to actually apply some of the stylistic things that I've been very inspired by lately, just some of the looseness, and not worry too much about needing features to look perfect or anatomically correct or any of that. If you guys are interested in seeing all of the colors that are in my handmade palette, that would be, I think, the first paint making video in the playlist, where I very first told you guys that I was even making paints. Pretty much all of those colors are the same, with the exception of a few at the end and the phthalo turquoise, but there's lots of the colors that are listed there. Oh boy, this video has been very long. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I hope that some of the things that I have been saying, the words that have been coming out of my mouth, have made sense in some way. It's surprisingly difficult to fill 25 minutes of video with voiceover, so I just try to think about it as though you and I were sitting in some space together and hanging out while I made these paints or painted this painting, and what kind of things would I say to you then, and just say it now. So I hope you're all doing very, very well, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions or anything at all. You can find the links to my shop where this original painting is listed, as well as prints for this piece down in the description, and I will see you guys in next week's video, and I hope you have a fantastic day and weekend and time. Okay, bye bye.